this important notion that we have these persistent identifiers and this great amount of information that we're already collecting, and we're building new tools to collect. And for Chorus, the idea here has been about automation. Can we take these tools we already have in hand and use them to drive public access and compliance really behind the scenes, not requiring authors to do anything. We don't want them depositing papers by hand or having to fill out a form. Yes, I did this. Yes, I'm compliant. Can we really just have a system that really does that for them? So as we've been building Chorus for some of the different funding agencies' implementations, we've been building these sort of tracking tools to offer them as well. We call them dashboards. There's a URL up there. You can go see some of these. They're live and online. I think the numbers have gone up, Howard says, since the last, since I grabbed this picture, which is always nice to see more and more articles coming in. But this is the idea of this is, on a basic sort of agency level. This is looking at NSF funded articles that we have in our system. And then the idea from there is to start drilling down and using the data in different ways. So here's the same sort of approach, but broken down by publisher. So here are the publishers who are in the system with this one particular funding agency and the numbers of articles. And we're really building more and more ways to drill down further and further into more detailed ways. And then the next sort of iteration of this is to build these same tools for publishers who are members of Chorus. So here's a tool for the APS showing overall compliance sort of across the board with all the funding agencies that are involved in the U.S. Mandates. And then this version shows APS's papers sort of broken down by individual funding agencies. And so these are the sort of tools we're building for our publisher members just to help you keep track of what's going on in your journal. Are you doing right by your authors? Are the articles, where are the articles? Are they, how many, who funded them? Are they publicly available as they're supposed to be? Have they been archived properly? Things like that we can track. So the next steps that we're thinking beyond that is, as I said, Chorus is based on the U.S. funding agencies, but we are, the idea is this is modular. It's meant to expand beyond just the 21 federal agencies. And the other really important thing is to talk about the sorts of tools that Judy sort of talked about, is this idea of, can we now build these dashboards for institutions and to help a librarian or that vice president of research to be able to say, all right, here's all the papers that are coming out from my institution, here's who funded them, and am I compliant with their agencies? So that's really a new focus for us that we're really driving on as well. And I think I'll just close by saying I think having these sort of broad and automated and interoperable tools for this global compliance tracking will really go a long way to relieving the burden that most of today's speakers told us about. So we'll take questions now. We have a few minutes. So.
My first question is about, it seems that most of the compliance is about just the articles being open access, but a portion of the compliance is about how they're archived. And I heard some discussion yesterday about not just archiving the PDF of itself, but also having to archive if there are extensive data tables that may or may not be part of that. So is that an added layer of complexity? And when it says whether it's archived or not archived, does this address those more detailed levels of archiving, like
right.
whether all the extensive data tables got archived?
So yeah, so this Chorus right now is focused on for the U.S. there are two sides of the mandate: public access to the articles, public access to the data behind the articles. There is absolutely no reason those same identifiers and those same tools can't be attached. Put a DOI on the data set, put a FundRef ID on it. You can build the exact same sort of tools and do this. I mean, the data availability is a huge can of worms, and there are intellectual property issues, and there's great, everybody likes having their articles freely available, but this is my data set. There's a lot of resistance among the research. So that's a bigger issue. I don't know, any of the panelists want to address? Judy, are you dealing with the data sets at all?
We are actively working on a project with research computing for just better management of data in general on the campus, but with the expectation that parts of that data are going to end up being reported and handled through these mandates. And I think the complexity of the publishing is nothing compared to the complexity of the data.
The papers are the easy side of it.
And particularly to have the data actually be useful. I mean, it's not that hard to put it somewhere, but to put it somewhere in a manner that someone could actually understand and use it is a very different problem. So we have a lot of homework still to do, I think, on the data side.
Yeah, I always cynically think that open access started with the articles just because data was what they wanted, but it was too big. So, data is everything from a photograph of a skin graft to an IR spectrum to interview notes. And so everyone who didn't create the data wants the data publicly available. Everyone who created the data wants some of it publicly available, but also says, this is my next 20 papers, and this is on my computer, and how am I even going to make this available, and this is my life's research. And so there's this huge inherent tension there. I think where we all have an opportunity, and I think what everyone here, and researchers would like is when data is being made available, in whatever format, that we use some standard identifiers. You can use DOIs. You can then attach and somehow find a way to resolve the content to the articles. And if you start small, there are things that can be done. And I think everyone would like to do that. And I think that's where this will go. If you treat data, you got to treat data small or else you'll just be frozen by the ability, by the monumental size of the task.
And the same data set may be referenced in multiple articles over time. So having those unique identifiers that then can be associated with multiple points of publication is important. I think that the effort to narrow the focus to the data that is represented most closely with the article and not all of the underlying research data, but more that summary data, is scalable and manageable, although still a challenge. But there's so much data out there, and most of it, unfortunately, is not well documented. And talk about a burden on the researcher. If you start trying to have the researcher spending infinitely more time preparing the data so someone who's never worked with it and isn't probably an expert in the field could actually understand and use it, the burden you have created on that researcher is fantastic.
Right, and I'm just wondering who should really be responsible for managing this, whether it's the publishers or, we've had a number of vendors, at this conference, we're sort of specializing in that data management, or is it the university? It seems like this is an emerging field, and so now people but at some point, who are we going to settle on to be responsible for making sure that the data can be accessed?
Well, I mean, it all comes back to the researcher because they're the one under the mandate. However, if I was starting a company today, this is a growth opportunity, whether you're an established publisher. Our job, we're a service industry, our job is to create smooth and easy paths for the people we serve. These are our customers. How easy can I make it for my researcher to be compliant? And then I think the stuff you heard about today is the papers are easy. We know what a paper is. We've got standards. We've got tools. We've got persistent identifiers. This is the model. Start with this because this is a less complex system, and can we apply those same principles to the data? And I think ways to do it will emerge, and whether that's from the private sphere, Dryad, groups like that are not-for-profit collaborative community efforts. The universities themselves want to, the universities, you talked about, you want to keep, this is the output of our university. We want to keep a permanent record, of what we've done. So there's.
Well, and I think overall, the concern of the university is if data is inappropriately released, the consequence isn't on the publisher or whoever's operating that platform. The consequences on the university. And the comment was made about if things don't go well, blaming the publisher. I don't think that's the perspective of the university, but I think the perspective of the university is if the compliance fails to happen, there's no consequence to the third party that we were relying on to do the deposit for us, or the compliance problem rests back at the university. So I think there's a very real sense on the part of the university that however this is implemented and whatever tools we're using, the bottom line is, the buck stops on our front porch, and so the way we approach it, I think, will be very much reflective of that concern.
Just to add that that's certainly the approach being taken in the UK. So we've just had a mandate come in this month from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council around data archiving, and absolutely the institutions feel it's their responsibility to do this. But you get a bunch of librarians in a room and get them talking off the record, and they're all saying, "Have you got any idea how to do this?" No. It is immensely challenging.
Much easier to write the policy than to implement it.
Yes. So I think we're seeing a series of piecemeal solutions, and it's also about the size of the data. So when you're talking about high-performance computing and big data, that's very different to a spreadsheet that supports an article. So there's going to be a lot of different ways of tackling this.
Can we squeeze in one more question, I guess, before we run out? Sure.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about standards, especially for metadata and other standards like publishers can use to make compliance easier, but is there any hope that there's going to be some development of standards for actual funder mandates? It seems like it would be a lot more possible.
No.
If a lot of funders were to realize that they really have the same mission, like is there a movement for any kind of standardization, or is it just going to be wild?
Yeah, I mean, it's early days, I think. People are trying a lot of different things, and we're seeing what's going to filter out. I think some of the problems in the UK has said, RC UK said, we're going to take the lead, it's going to be gold, everybody's going to follow along. We're going to spend more right now, but everybody else is going to do this. We're going to stop subscribing to all the journals, and in the end, it'll pay for itself. And Australia and the U.S. and everyone else said, no, thank you. We're just going to do a green mandate. You're on your own. And now, if you work for a publisher, you're dealing with a lot of libraries who now have this much higher financial burden, and they're looking for ways to relieve that burden. It's hard to say, governments are weird, funding agencies. The work we've done with Chorus, it's been such a learning experience for me of, finding out what their motivations are, and how happy are they that this extra work has been placed on them is not so happy in a lot of cases. We've talked with people about, the grant numbers. I think Roy mentioned, well, is there can we build that? Should we build that into the submission process? Is there this sort of organized way that they do grant numbers so we can track them and make sure it's all identified? And the answer is no. For most agencies, there is not an organized system of how they assign grant numbers that that plugs into some way that we could plug it and track it. So it's a lot of different actors with a lot of different motivations. Roy, you may.
Yeah, well, the good thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. Talk about authors being important. Well, a funder who's granting, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in research is going to say, as they've said to me, well, we want it our way. Now, a lot of them, I do think the NIH is becoming, the way they do it has become a de facto standard. The way Department of Energy in the U.S. will become a de facto standard. Someone leads and then others decide if they're going to adopt it. But yeah, they tweak it and everything else. On the bright side, below that sort of meta level of what what their requirements are, we can build at least smaller, they're going to have their requirements, and those requirements might not be perfectly standardized. But you can use things like FundRef so you can at least identify who they are. And most of them are using, for good or ill, some sort of a Creative Commons license. And then you can standardize those elements. So even if everyone's kind of mixing and matching on their policy, at least to some degree, not 100% ever, but to some degree, we can at least start building around so they can pick the blocks they like, and ultimately things will hopefully work. But I was terribly frightened by that slide as to how many mandates. That threw me. I just wouldn't have had that anywhere near that as a guess. So.
And I think we're heavily focused because the bulk of our research money comes from within the U.S. and comes from the federal government. So we're heavily focused on those mandates. But we definitely do partner with people in other countries, and we definitely do have funding that's coming from agencies all over the world as a result, and foundations like Wellcome Trust. And so we're going to have to be alert to all of those things as well. And it's not a simple, straightforward, throw this switch. So I do think it's incredibly important that we be having the kinds of dialogues that are represented here, because no one institution is going to solve this problem. I mean, so it's good that the publishers are working with one another. It's good that a number of the universities are working together and that we're working with the publishers, because we all need it to work. And I think that's really the place that's going to help is to have us all talking to each other and to the funding agencies so that we're informing what are the problems we're encountering with implementation, not out of lack of will to comply, but out of just simply the way they end up being structured.
All right. We've run a little over. I think that's a great place to leave. We all need to communicate and keep this dialogue going. And thank you for your time, and do come talk to us individually.